The following is an installment of Backtracking, a pop culture journey by Carlo DeSalvo.
And this is part of his ongoing audio, video, and literary series where he explores pop culture from a very specific Generation X perspective.
And today's deep dive is focusing on his piece, A History of Kids' Afternoon Television Before He-Man and the Transformers Edition.
All right, picking up right where we left off, we're now diving into parts 3 and 4 of our deep dive into kids' weekday afternoon TV from, that sweet spot in the late 70s and early 80s. So, if you're of a certain age, you probably remember this, that feeling of getting home from school, turning on the TV, and just diving into this bizarre world of weekday afternoon cartoons. We're not talking about the big, shiny Saturday morning shows here. No. This was a whole different beast. Today, we're taking a trip back to that strange, wonderful landscape of syndicated kids' TV right before everything changed in 1983.
Okay, first up, let's really nail down this difference, because it's the key to understanding why weekday TV felt so wonderfully weird and honestly a little chaotic. See, before 1983, there just wasn't this big push for brand new afternoon cartoons. So what did the independent stations do? They bought these syndicated packages, basically big bundles of older shows that were sold for reruns. This created a totally separate universe of programming that had nothing to do with what was happening on the main networks.
Yeah, the contrast back then was just massive. Saturday mornings were all about the big 3 networks. It was appointment television, right? You had to be there for the brand new, super hyped shows. But weekday afternoons? That was the Wild West. It was the turf of local independent stations, and their whole vibe was much more chill. Just a comfortable, reliable mix of reruns you could drop into anytime after school. And this is where it gets really interesting, because production houses, especially a little one you might have heard of called Hanna-Barbera, they got very creative. To fill all that airtime, they became absolute masters of repackaging their old stuff into something that felt, well, kind of new. A perfect example of this was a show called Fred Flintstone and Friends. Now, you'd see that in the TV guide and think, oh, cool, a new Flintstone show. But nope, it was actually this clever grab bag, a rotating collection of a bunch of different Hanna-Barbera cartoons from a few years earlier. And the randomness was just incredible. I mean, the Friends in the title could literally be anyone. One day you're watching Pebbles and Bam Bam as teenagers in a band. The next day it's a cartoon version of I Dream of Jeannie. And the next, just the Partridge Family in the year 2200. In space. As you do. So all this recycling and rerunning and repackaging, it created some wonderfully messy timelines. And no franchise got tangled up more than Hanna-Barbera's first family, the Flintstones. Just think about this for a second. As a kid, you were basically watching 4 different versions of these characters at the same time. You had the original reruns where Pebbles and Bam Bam were babies. Then in the Fred Flintstone and Friends block, they were teenagers. But then you'd flip over to the new Saturday morning show and boom, they're toddlers again. And a few years after that, they were teenagers again, but younger teenagers. It made zero logical sense, but did we care? Not at all. We just went with it.
So here's the crucial thing to understand. Fred Flintstone and Friends. This wasn't really a new show. It was a container. It was a syndicated package deal that let a local station buy a whole block of programming filled with characters kids already knew and loved. It was cheap, it was easy, and it filled up that valuable after-school airtime.
You see, this business model didn't just create these wonderfully confusing timelines. It created entirely new ways for a show to become a classic. So let's look at 2 totally iconic shows that had wildly different journeys to get there.
Okay, first up, The Flintstones. We know it was a certified primetime hit. It ran for 6 seasons, 166 episodes. That's a huge library of content, just perfect for daily reruns. It was a proven winner right out of the gate. But now, consider The Jetsons. Same studio, same idea of a primetime animated sitcom, but it got canceled after just 1 season, only 24 episodes. By any standard of 1960s television, it was a flop. But syndication had other plans.
And this table just brilliantly illustrates the power of a second chance. The Flintstones went from a primetime hit to an afternoon super hit. But the Jetsons went from being a primetime flop to a Saturday morning legend. For 2 decades, those same 24 episodes ran over and over and over again, building this massive audience of kids who had no idea it was ever considered a failure.
And that's really why this whole era was so special. A show didn't have to be a smash hit on day one. The hungry markets of Saturday mornings and weekday afternoons could find a forgotten show and turn it into a cultural touchdown.
Of course, it wasn't just Hanna-Barbera's futuristic and Stone Age families running the show. The entire after-school block was populated by this amazing roster of all-stars, who all got there in slightly different ways.
I mean, take Scooby-Doo. It was always a first-run hit on Saturday mornings for sure. But as new versions of the show were created, the older ones, like the classic Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, were sold into weekday syndication. It was a genius strategy that made sure Scooby was never off the air, giving generations of kids a daily dose of mystery and making that gang absolutely timeless icons.
Another huge thing from this era was the crossover episode. You know, when characters from totally different shows would meet up. And while lots of shows did it, nobody, and I mean nobody, did it better than the new Scooby-Doo movies, which was a constant, glorious fixture in afternoon reruns.
What made this show so amazing was just how wild the guest list was. It was completely all over the map. You had real-life celebrities like Don Knotts and Tim Conway voicing themselves. You had classic comedy acts like the Three Stooges. Then you had crossovers from other Hanna-Barbera shows, and even DC superheroes like Batman and Robin.
And check this out. Here's a fantastic piece of trivia that really shows you the power of these weekday reruns. For a whole lot of kids watching in the late 70s, their very first introduction to the Hanna-Barbera versions of Batman and Robin wasn't on the legendary Super Friends show. Nope. It was right here, on a rerun of a Scooby-Doo episode that had actually aired a full year before Super Friends even existed. All right, so if the animation world was a little quirky, the live-action stuff was on another planet. While Hanna-Barbera pretty much owned cartoons, the live-action kingdom belonged to the brilliantly bizarre, low-budget, and completely unforgettable shows from producers Sid and Marty Krofft. And just like Hanna-Barbera, the Krofts bundled all their shows into a weekday package deal. This one was called Krofft Superstars. So each day you'd get a different show from their library, and you'd be rotating through these psychedelic fantasies like HR Puff Stuff and way ahead of its time sci-fi like Land of the Lost. The author of our source material had a personal favorite, Far Out Space Nuts, and the premise was pure, simple slapstick. You've got two clumsy workers loading up a rocket at NASA. One of them is told to press the button for launch, and, well, you can guess what happens. He hits launch by mistake, and whoops, they're accidentally blasted into space for an adventure across the galaxy. So, with these twisted-up timelines, partridge families in space, and lunch buttons that launch rockets, how in the world did we process any of this? Well, the final, crucial piece of this whole puzzle is something we can just call kid logic. Let's go back to the star of Far Out Space Nuts, Bob Denver. Now, everyone knew him as Gilligan from Gilligan's Island, which was another show that was always in reruns. But in Space Nuts, his hair was longer and it was a bit grayer. So to a kid's brain, it was simple. That can't possibly be the same person. They look kind of similar, sure, but they have to be different actors. It's just logic. And this quote from the source material just sums it all up perfectly. Our kid brains were working overtime, basically inventing their own rules to make sense of this beautiful, chaotic mess of TV we were watching every afternoon. The logic was, totally faulty, but hey, it worked for us. And really, that's what made this whole era so special, isn't it? In spite of the tangled timelines, the recycled animation, and the shoestring budgets, it was our own imaginations that filled in all the blanks. We just accepted the contradictions, we embraced the weirdness, and we ended up creating these powerful, lasting memories from a truly one-of-a-kind moment in TV history.
Two very specific pillars of this syndicated era. One is a masterclass in unintentional geography changes and swamp-based slapstick.
And the other is a masterclass in Cold War satire disguised as a variety show.
We are talking, of course, about the Deputy Dog Show.
And Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Two shows that could not be more different, yet somehow lived in the exact same ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Often airing one right after the other. Mm-hmm. But before we get to the specifics of The Dog and the Moose, we really need to set the scene. Paint the picture of the landscape for us. It's a Tuesday morning, early 80s. What are we looking at?
Well, to understand the landscape, you have to understand the giants. If you turned on the TV on a weekday morning or afternoon, the dominant force was Hanna-Barbera.
The heavy hitters.
Oh, absolutely. The Flintstones, the Jetsons, Yogi Bear, these were the titans. They were everywhere. They had the branding, the merchandise.
The lunchboxes.
The lunchboxes, exactly. And alongside them, you had what we call golden era theatrical packages. Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies. Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Right. And the animation quality on those theatrical shorts was usually miles ahead of the TV stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were originally made for massive cinema screens in the 40s and 50s.
Significantly better frame rates, beautifully painted backgrounds, full orchestras, but those were the main courses. But a TV station has to fill 24 hours, or at least the broadcast day.
Sure.
They can't just run the Flintstones for 6 hours straight. It's too expensive, and they didn't have enough episodes. So in the gaps between the giants, you found the outliers.
The outliers. I like that. It's like the B-sides of the cartoon world.
Precisely. These were the shows that, weren't quite Hanna-Barbera polish, and they weren't quite Bugs Bunny genius. The shows slipped into the schedule because they were affordable for the station, and they filled a 30-minute block perfectly.
Okay, let's look at a perfect example of this whole thing in action. I'm talking about a certain lawman, a canine lawman from the South. You probably remember him as Deputy Dog. On the surface, it's just a simple, fun cartoon, but its backstory is actually pretty fascinating. So get this show that was a staple of our 80s afternoons was really a product of the early 60s. It was made by Terry Toons specifically for TV, which meant it was perfectly packaged to just run and run and run in syndication for years to come.
And the comedy here, it was just brilliantly simple. It wasn't trying to be deep or anything. It was all about the action, the visual punchlines, and those really memorable Southern voices. Just straightforward fun, designed to get the biggest laughs with the least amount of fuss.
So unlike Bugs Bunny, Deputy Dog wasn't a movie star first. He was a TV native.
Mostly, yes. It aired in what's called first-run syndication from 1960 to 1964. And after 1964, production stopped and it moved into daily repeats. That is the version our author's watching in the 80s.
The zombie version.
The zombie version of the show that just kept looping forever because it was cheap for stations to buy.
Okay, let's deconstruct this show itself. If I'm a kid in 1983 sitting on that shag carpet, what am I actually watching? What was the Deputy Dog package?
It was a variety meal. DeSalvo notes that the show was a half-hour program, and it consisted of 3 individual cartoons.
3 shorts.
3 shorts, yeah. Each one was about 4 to 6 minutes long.
Short, snappy, perfect for short attention spans.
And the premise was pure sitcom. Deputy Dog is an anthropomorphic dog. He is a deputy sheriff in the Deep South, and he's surrounded by a cast of varmints.
Right.
You had Muskie, Muskrat, and Tycoon.
Tycoon. I see
Yeah.
what they did there. That is a groaner.
It was the era of the pun. You also had Vincent Van Gogh,
Okay.
and then you had the authority figures. The sheriff, he was the boss, and Mrs. Deputy, the wife. But then there was the wild card character, the one that makes absolutely no sense in a show about a southern swamp.
Oh.
Astronaut.
Astronaut. Let me guess. An astronaut.
A mischievous space alien.
Wait, what? In a show about a sheriff guarding a melon patch?
It was the 60s. The space race was on. Everyone needed an alien. He was the weird addition to the cast. He actually got his own spin-off later, but in Deputy Dog, he was just there.
Visiting from the cosmos to annoy a dog in Florida? There's another weird element to the Deputy Dog package, the Sydney the Elephant factor. This feels like a bait and switch.
It is the Trojan horse of syndication. So remember how Terry Toons used to make theatrical shorts?
Right.
Well, Sydney the Elephant, also known as Silly Sydney, was a character created during Gene Deitch's tenure in the mid to late 50s. He appeared in theatrical shorts from 1958 to 1963. He was relatively successful in cinemas.
Okay, so he was a movie star.
Of a sort. So when they packaged Deputy Dog for television, they needed to fill that half-hour slot. They had these Sydney shorts just sitting in the vault.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So they slipped a Sydney the Elephant theatrical cartoon into every Deputy Dog epic.
You tune in for the dog, you get the elephant?
It was a clever way to monetize old assets. And for the
Uh-huh.
kid watching in the 80s, they didn't know the difference. They didn't know Sydney was a movie star with a higher budget and Deputy Dog was a TV actor. They were just cartoons in the same block.
But hiding behind all that simplicity was a little hint of something much, much bigger. Because there's this amazing hidden history here. Tucked away in the credits of this charming little kids show was a name that would go on to completely change the game for animation, for adults. That's right, Ralph Bakshi, the guy who would go on to direct these groundbreaking, super controversial films like Fritz the Cat and Wizards. He got his professional start as an animator on the Deputy Dog show. How wild is that? It's just an incredible piece of animation history, hiding in plain sight.
So what is the final verdict from our author? Was Deputy Dog a hidden masterpiece. Should we be petitioning for a Criterion Collection release?
DeSalvo classifies it as a solid B-tier viewing experience. He says, and I quote, "It wasn't my favorite, but I still found it quite enjoyable. It was reliable, it was funny, it was there."
Sometimes being there is the most important quality for a cartoon. But now we have to pivot. We're leaving the swamps of Tennessee or Florida or Mississippi or wherever it was that week and heading to Frostbite Falls. Because the other pillar of this syndication deep dive is the one, the only, Rocky and Bullwinkle.
A completely different animal, literally and figuratively.
DeSalvo seems to have a lot more reverence for this one.
Oh, he really liked it, and for good reason. If Deputy Dog was a sitcom, Rocky and Bullwinkle was a variety show disguised as animation. It was dense, it was layered.
Okay, first off, can we please address the name? Because I feel like I have heard it called 5 different things, and I'm never sure which one is right.
You're right to be confused. It's a bit of a name game. DeSalvo breaks it down chronologically, and it really shows how the show moved between networks, which was very common for these hits.
So walk us through the timeline.
When it originally aired on ABC from 1959 to 1961, it was called Rocky and His Friends.
Okay, that makes sense. Rocky was the smart one. He gets top billing.
Then it moved to NBC from 1961 to 1964, and they rebranded it as The Bullwinkle Show.
The Moose takes over. The networks clearly had different favorites.
Then, when it went into syndication, which is how our 80s kids saw it, it was usually titled The Rocky and Bullwinkle Show.
Okay, merging the brands. Smart.
And just to confuse things further, if you bought the VHS tapes or DVDs years later, the blanket title was The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends. But DeSalvo notes that title was never actually used on TV during the original run.
It's a branding nightmare. But the content was gold. DeSalvo describes the structure as a huge part of the appeal. It wasn't just one story. It was a blitz.
No, it wasn't. You got the Moose and Squirrel, serialized adventures. Those were the wraparound segments. And they always ended in these great cliffhangers.
Tune in next time for Avalanche is Better Than None or No Place Like Home.
Exactly. They mocked the very idea of suspense. But sandwiched between those, you had this incredible roster of other segments. Fractured Fairy Tales, which took classic stories and just twisted them with modern cynicism.
I love those.
Peabody's Improbable History, with the genius dog and his pet boy Sherman time-traveling. Dudley Do-Right of the Mounties.
And the little intermission bits. Bullwinkle's Corner, where he'd read poetry and completely mess it up. Or Mr. Know-It-All.
DeSalvo loved this format. He says, "I enjoyed that you got a variety of different segments in each program, all in the same style with the same kind of humor."
It felt like a curated magazine of comedy.
It did. You never got bored, because if you didn't like the Moose story, you knew the fairy tale was coming up in 2 minutes.
And the voices. We have to talk about the voices. Because reading this chapter, I realized that Rocky and Bullwinkle basically introduced an entire generation to the art of voice acting before they even knew what that was.
Oh, it centers on 2 absolute titans.
Right.
First, Bill Scott. He was the head writer, but he was also the voice of Bullwinkle J. Moose, Mr. Peabody, and Dudley Do-Right.
That is a huge range, from the dopey, slow-witted moose to the hyper-intelligent, snarky dog to the dim-witted but noble Mountie. That's incredible versatility.
But the real star, the first lady of animation, is June Foray.
June Foray, a legend.
And DeSalvo makes a really interesting point here. He says that June Foray was the first voice actor whose characters he began to recognize before he recognized Mel Blanc.
That is high praise, because Mel Blanc Bugs Bunny is usually the entry point for voice acting awareness. Who did she play on the show?
Well, she was Rocky the Flying Squirrel, obviously, but she was also Natasha Fatale, the sultry spy.
The Wing.
Yes, and she was Nell Fenwick, the damsel in Dudley Do-Right, plus countless voices in Fractured Fairy Tales.
So she was playing the hero, the villain, and the love interest, sometimes all in the same half hour.
And her career connects the dots of animation history. DeSalvo lists her other roles, and it's just staggering. She was Granny and Witch Hazel for Warner Bros. She was a different Witch Hazel for Disney.
Wait, really? She played the same character archetype for rival studios?
Yes, that is how good she was. And for the 80s kids listening, she was Magica De Spell in DuckTales.
Oh, wow.
And for the classic Christmas lovers, she was Cindy Lou, who in the 1966 How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
The Who was no more than 2. That was June Foray.
That was her. So when you were watching Rocky and Bullwinkle in the 80s, you were hearing a voice that wove through almost every major animated property of the 20th century. It gave the show a sonic familiarity. It made the whole world feel connected.
But let's talk about the tone, because Rocky and Bullwinkle feels very, very different from Deputy Dog. Deputy Dog is a dog falling in a hole. Rocky and Bullwinkle felt smarter.
It was significantly smarter. Rocky and Bullwinkle was a satire.
Right.
It was a homage to the old movie serials and radio dramas. It was vaudeville. It was commenting on the Cold War. Boris and Natasha were clearly Soviet spies, even if they never said the word Soviet.
No, they were from Pottsylvania.
Right, from Pottsylvania. But we all knew what that meant.
DeSalvo admits, though, as a kid, he didn't quite get that part.
No, and that's the beauty of it. He says, I never understood until I was older how much the Rocky and Bullwinkle show was a satirical homage. The dry wit, the characters breaking the fourth wall and talking to the narrator, all of that went right over his head.
I love that meta humor. The narrator says, Rocky is in grave danger, and Rocky looks at the camera and says, not again.
Yeah.
It is so postmodern. It feels like something you'd see in a show today, like Rick and Morty or Community.
But this was 1960. But DeSalvo points out that even though the satire missed him, the slapstick and the creative animation kept him hooked. It operated on two levels simultaneously. It entertained the child with visual gags.
Yeah.
Bullwinkle pulling a rhino out of a hat while secretly training them to appreciate irony.
Whereas Deputy Dog.
Deputy Dog was purely the visual gag level. There was no meta commentary on the nature of law enforcement in the rural South. It was just a dog guarding a melon. It was what it was.
Both valuable, but different nutrients for a growing brain. One is candy, the other is maybe a vitamin gummy disguised as candy.
Precisely. And that combination, getting both the slapstick and the satire in the same morning, created a very specific kind of sense of humor for that generation.
Now, before we wrap up, we have to touch on the ritual. Because when you watch these shows, was almost as important as what you watched.
DeSalvo has a very specific memory regarding Rocky and Bullwinkle. For him, it wasn't an afternoon show. It was a morning show.
Well, morning.
6:30 a.m.
Oof. That is dedication. 6:30 a.m. on a school day.
He says, as long as I got up early enough, it was the one cartoon I could watch completely before I had to start getting ready for school.
I can picture that perfectly. The house is quiet. It's probably still dark outside. Your parents are maybe just waking up. The heater is clanking.
Yeah.
You're eating a bowl of cereal, and it's just you and Bullwinkle.
It was a private time. It felt like a secret club. And he mentions it aired on Saturdays, too, on a local independent station before the network cartoons started.
The pregame show.
He calls it the appetizer before the main course of Saturday morning cartoons. Even if he wanted to sleep in, if he woke up early, Rocky and Bullwinkle was there.
It's interesting how availability dictates our favorites. He watched it because it was the only thing on at 6:30, but it became a core memory.
That is the power of the syndication time machine. You didn't choose the programming chose you.
So, let's bring this all together. We have traveled from the swamps of a Terry Toons production, featuring the debut of Ralph Bakshi, of all people, to the high-minded satire of Jay Ward's Rocky and Bullwinkle, voiced by the legendary June Foray.
So at the end of the day, these shows were way more than just reruns. They were like these little cultural time capsules. A show like Rocky and Bullwinkle, it was a layered masterpiece that actually grew up with you. All those jokes you missed as a kid were just waiting there for you to finally discover as an adult, which made it a totally different and honestly a much richer experience.
And that kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What show from your childhood is holding secret layers that you just never noticed? What goofy cartoon was secretly this brilliant satire, just waiting for you to grow up and finally get the joke?
Whew. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on our trip back to the golden age of after-school TV, haven't we? Before we wrap this part up, let's just take a quick second to look back at everything we've dived into so far. We kick things off by remembering that classic after-school ritual. You know, snacks in hand, glued to the television. Then we dug into the very beginnings of kids' programming, from those charming local hosts to huge national hits like the new Mickey Mouse Club. We saw how syndication completely changed the game, with animation powerhouses like Hanna-Barbera and the Kroft brothers starting to really take over the schedule. And of course, we had to celebrate some true icons of the era, Deputy Dog and the one, the only, Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Now, you might be thinking, we've pretty much covered all the big stuff from this era. But here's the crazy part. Everything we've talked about up to this point, it was just the opening act. That's right. The main event is actually still to come. And this quote, man, it just nails it. We were about to enter an era of cartoon greatness that was like nothing else, a total feast for the eyes. So get ready, because the real game changer is next.
We're about to see what happened when the amazing theatrical cartoons from animation's golden age completely stormed the small screen and changed the after-school world forever.
And believe me, this is where it really gets good. To see how it all unfolds, you're going to have to join us for the next part of our journey. I promise you don't want to miss it. I can't wait to share it with you. See you in part 5.